Hello everyone, it is Marjoram of Sage and Marjoram back with another video. Today we are looking at a triptych of scarves that I worked on, and we're going to start off with kind of the blueprint scarf. So you can see here I am looking at a giraffe drawdown that I've created using Triptych. It's a program similar to a lot of other programs that allow you to create weaving drafts. However, it's free and open source, and I was just not convinced at the time to pay for a weaving software. Even the iPad apps are like $20, and I was like, I don't know about that. When there is a free resource, not sponsored, I literally just searched for a free weaving draft creating software, and this popped up. So you can see I've created sort of a houndstooth, sort of not a houndstooth. I am looking at some movement in my houndstooth, and so these are actually a bunch of different sections, where every now and then it'll be houndstooth, or maybe it'll be puppy tooth, or maybe it'll be distorted in one way or another. I have sections of 8, 6, 4, and 2, and I'm treadling trompe as writ, so treadling the same way that I've done the tie-up. So you can see there's a lot of movement here, and I just wanted something a little bit more dynamic than plain houndstooth, even though I love houndstooth. I was feeling more is more with this pattern, because you'll see when we get to the actual loom, I'm also weaving with a gradient sock blank as the berry color, and a tonal kind of mustard yellow as the golden color here. So I do really like this program. I've actually used it a few times now, and I'm using it for a current project that is on the loom right now in January 2023. This was actually started, I believe, in August or September. I think it was the end of August that I started planning this project last year. And it's just taken me a long time because I wove 3 scarves in the project over the course of a couple of months. And then I was very busy at the end of last year, working at the opera, wrapping up my job there. Moving on to another tool that I use. This is also free. This is from Shacked. This is their warp and weft calculator, and I use this to figure out my materials that I would need for the projects. So here you can see I'm warping, and I have to preface this by saying I worked with a sock blank without getting the kinks out of it. You can see here as I'm getting ready to go through my reed, I've already done the whole warping process, but I haven't pulled the threads through the reed in order to really start weaving. My yarn is kinky, and only half of it is. However, you'll see when we get to the end, this was no issue whatsoever. If you've worked with sock blanks before in knitting or crocheting, there's really no issue with having kinky yarn because you're going from one knotted or looped state into another one, and so those really don't matter. With weaving, I will say I was a little bit worried, so I actually left this on my warping board under tension, light tension, but under tension, for 2 days, I believe 2 full days before I took it off and started to warp my loom. And I was just really careful, the same way that I am with any warping, to keep it under even tension while I was winding onto the back beam, and make sure that I had all of the threads at the same length, and I actually had no issues whatsoever. The same with my bobbins, they were also kinky, and I had no issues with them either. As soon as it's under tension and I'm weaving, everything works out just fine. So let's get to some actual weaving. You'll see here, I did a little header, and I also hem-stitched in my golden color, and then I'm moving on to working with that kinky weft as well. And you'll see what I'm doing is I'm actually pulling it just a little bit tighter, and I'm actually having a bit of an easier time not having to do quite as high of a weaving angle because the yarn already has some travel in it, which is one of the things that you need to worry about when you're weaving, is having enough yarn in the shed when you close it to beat that it has room to travel over all of those threads and under all of the others, so that you don't have a ton of draw in from the sides. Now that that is done, I'm just going to show you real quick. I actually decided after weaving that first section of 8 that I would keep both of my yarns going at the same time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to carry the yarns up the side while I am weaving. It makes it a lot easier for me while weaving, but it also makes it a little bit cleaner on the self edge. I like that kind of carried up look. Some people might not care for it, but I just don't care for all of the weaving end of ends. I decided, even if it's a section of 4, 6, or 8, I'm just going to carry it up the side. And it's very easy to do if you've ever worked with 2 shuttles or done houndstooth or color work. You just go over, and as you come around, you make sure that you tuck underneath the resting yarn that you have set underneath your loom, or above, depending on your preference. But working on a table loom without a castle, I am setting my yarn underneath and just looping under it as I go up. Makes for a very clean self edge as long as you make sure that you have some nice even tension on your yarn. Let's take a brief intermission from this project. I was working on 2 at the same time, so here is the yarn for the next iteration of this same scarf, same pattern, but I'm working in 2 of the same color. This is actually some yarn that came from the School of Sweet Georgia SOS Scholarship. So is the yarn that's currently on the loom, by the way. That was also from the SOS Scholarship. These are 2 skeins of, I believe this is Sweet Georgia BFL Silk. Yes, it's BFL Silk Fine in the shade Sage. So this one is not a superwash, but it does have silk in it. And I actually over dyed it, and just a dip dye. I used the Sweet Georgia acid dye kit, and I believe I used pure turquoise. I don't think I mixed anything else in with it. But I did end up getting, you'll see, between the 2 skeins, I ended up getting some variation. This bottom skein got a much higher concentration of the teal than the second skein. I'm still not entirely sure what I did, but I was working in a very small pot, and I think that the second skein was sitting slightly on top of the first skein while it was in there. I did dye these with minimal movement. I just put them in and let them take up the dye before I added my acid a little bit into the process. I wanted to do that to get a more even color. So it is still tonal, but it's more even than, say, if the water had acid in it from the start. And here you can see where I was in the first project. I was just a little bit in, but I wanted to let the weaving rest so that I could see. I actually took it off tension for a little bit and let it rest so I could see if the kinkiness of the yarn would have any issues. It did not, and so I wove away. Here I am at the end of the first project. You can see I left long tails of my 2 colors there that I'm going to put into my fringe at the end, and it's time to just cut this off of the loom. Okay, so here are the 2 sides of the scarf. You can see on the right, the colors and the weft and the warp are much closer, so we have more of a houndstooth pattern versus on the left. And you can see, here's the difference between the kinky yarn and the straight yarn that didn't come with the stock blank. However, if I take a section and I pull the kinky yarn to match the yarn that came straight from the skein, they actually are the same length, and I had no issues with any shrinkage or any odd draw in when I finished this. I did not use a heat press on this one. I actually polished this with an iron just to make sure that I got each individual section. I think you have a little bit more leverage when you work with an iron than you do if you use a stationary heat press. Okay, moving on to the next one. Here you can see what I mean by using just the same color, but as long as it's, a two-toned or a dipped yarn, you can flip it for pooling. So I used a method from, I believe it's the Faux Ecot course on Sweet Georgia. so that I could get my pooling to line up, and then I wove the same exact pattern. Here you can see, because of the way that my weft is, the color changes every 2 picks, versus, the other one I was doing trompe as writ. This one I am just weaving with 1 shuttle, with 1 weft. And it's giving me some variation. So I already knew I was going to have smaller tessellations rather than a true houndstooth. The biggest I would get is puppy tooth. So here you can see my bobbins look pretty wild, but it really does come off just as the 2 picks of one shade, and then it swaps to 2 picks of the next. And I'm very happy with this, but you can see there the blocks in the warping are exactly the same, and I warped it, in areas of 6, 4, 8, and 2. And I'm very happy with it. Here I am in fabric printing mode, as I like to call it, lounging on my chaise, just printing away. And there you can really see the patterns starting to build up and how they kind of move. Now taking this one off the loom, I actually chose to leave a long fringe. I wanted to have as much length as I could, just because I wanted some drama in the fringe length. But here you can see, as I'm pulling it off, you can really start to see there are sections of kind of defined stripes where they slowly merge into these sections of more color mixing. I really love it. I think that this one came out probably my favorite of the 3, but I'm a little biased because I also love teal. I ended up giving this one to my sister for Christmas, which is another reason why I didn't show this ahead of time. I didn't know what I was going to be doing with these. Here's a section where you can see kind of the more defined area moving into a lot of color mixing, but you can see there are tessellations, there are stripes. It really looks almost like distorted houndstooth, distorted puppy tooth, in a really interesting and intriguing way. So if I go ahead and compare this to the first scarf with the same pattern, still not wet finished or anything, you can see that it's still very curly over there. But after sitting for about a week and a half, I think at this point, between these 2 scarves, this first scarf is still looking just fine. No crazy draw-in, no real shrinkage or anything like that. I think it looks just fine. Excuse my SD card, I was filming a lot. Here you can see the second scarf. Compared to the first one, you can still see those striped sections. Okay, so this is, I think, really interesting. You can see, if I look at this edge section, you can see the dark first section of the dye job and how it transitions to the light. Looking at the top row, and then 1 row down is doing the opposite, and that's how I warped it, so that they would swap and give me this really interesting pattern. If I wanted to, I probably could have woven it in a real houndstooth, but I was very interested in getting that patterning that we saw. So moving on to the 3rd iteration and the final piece of this scarf triptych, I started from some undyed yarn. I believe I'm working in a merino superwash base from Knitpicks. I first did a full dye in 2 shades. I believe it was the deep red and the fuchsia. Then I glazed in a light mustard shade, and finally I dipped into jet black. So it gave me kind of this persimmon red with tonal areas of a orange, a really bright red orange, and areas of even brighter mustardy orange almost. And then I got a Mars black for my black, kind of a red toned black rather than a neutral or blue toned black. I'm not going to show the warping process this time just because it looked like the first two. However, it was a bit messier because I decided to warp it on an angle. And I was like, how much can I push this away from houndstooth but still have some sort of pattern or movement develop? And I think that I got a really interesting result this time. So I'm going to go ahead and tension and get started weaving. Here I'm just checking on my twill angle, trying to see if I'm getting somewhat straight of a twill, and I did. And I'm not going to show you all the weaving of that one either. This was probably a month and a half after I wove the first one, just because I was busy making opera at work. And I would come home and just weave whenever I had a moment, and I finished this one. I think this one took me probably a week of weaving, but between all the different projects and also going in and out of work running workshops and events, I was just very busy. This one ended up coming out so interesting. It really looks way more intermixed, and I'll talk about it more when I get it down on the table, but just looking at it even now, you can kind of see some of the differences between this one and even the second scarf that I warped in the same exact way. So, like I mentioned, I warped it again for pooling, so you do see sections of almost stripes, where you can see the sections as they were defined. However, warping it on the angle, it broke up those sections even more, and so they kind of fade in to stripes a little bit more gently. And then the other difference is in the weft bobbins, and this is because of the length of my skein. That will change, the frequency, I would say, of the colors. So instead of it changing every other pick, it changed for the orange. I had 3 picks of the orangish red and then 2 picks of the black, versus it being an even 2 picks of orangish red, 2 picks of black. And that gave me a different shape to the base tessellation, the base color and weave pattern. And so having that change, plus having it being slanted, it almost gets like a really crackly, like embery look, especially, aided by the fact that it is almost orange and black. It's very busy, I would say. The first one I'd say is very busy in terms of it's a very bold color pattern. The second one, I think, is the most tranquil, but also busy, and almost the most like mathematic looking. And the final one is the most chaotic, but also most interesting to me. So, anyways, thank you all so much for watching. I have a lot of new things that I am working on that I'm going to share with you all sometime soon. I'm starting up a short form series as well, and I have already filmed the first 8 episodes of my short form series to go here on YouTube in shorts, and also on my Instagram and maybe other social media platforms. We'll see. Happy New Year. Here's to 2023. I hope you enjoyed this kind of retrospective of the latter half of 2022. So, I will see you all in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.